You can see the snow is in the ground. It's actually 8 degrees minus. And you can see there my wife, my daughter. That water is 1 degree Celsius. And then my other daughter. And there is my wife. And that's me. Believe it or not, this is really good for you. Okay? Trust me that when I'm still alive. So that change of temperature is actually very good for your immune system. There's actually lots of research from Finland documenting the benefits of the sauna bath. And I'm coming from Weimar. Weimar is located in the northern part of California. If you want to visualize it in your head, where San Francisco is, you move northeast, you arrive to the capital of California, which is Sacramento, and then another 45 minutes up the mountains, that's where Weimar is located. And in Weimar, what we do there, the persons come from all over the world, and by changing the way they live, we help them regain their health. In fact, as they try the new diet and the exercise and all these things, they work in a synergistic way, and amazing things you see there. For example, this is a patient of ours that came recently, had lots of diseases, diabetes, problems with allergies, hypertension, prostate, obesity, and many, many medical conditions, to the fact that he had to take this bag of pills every single day. As he learned the changes that we were applying there, he continued at home, and in a few months, he was able to stop most of the medications in that bag. We're actually publishing this clinical case at the moment. It will be published in a few weeks. And we were doing the mathematics. He is actually saving $53,800 a year of medication he no longer needs. Imagine that, tremendous savings. Not only your health improves, but also your pocket can potentially improve as a result of that. And we have been documenting all these things in the scientific literature, like this one about depression. We'll be talking about this in the second hour, how depression has causes, and if you can deal with those causes of the depression will reverse. This one about how we're helping people decrease their psychiatric medication as the person deals with the problem in different ways, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, exercise, rest, and so forth. And one of the things that we use as we remove some of those medications are helpful things such as lavender oil. Lavender oil has the capacity to help you deal with anxiety in a much better way without the addictive potential of certain medications. Also, the importance of vitamin D. You can live in beautiful Australia with lots of sunshine and still be deficient on vitamin D. As we have moved and changed the way that we used to live, our ancestors, we are spending too much time inside buildings, and we can get ourselves in trouble. Documenting important remedies such as charcoal. Charcoal has tremendous potential to absorb, and in this study we're documenting how charcoal is potentially very beneficial for insect bites. This one about exercise, how as you start an exercise program, your level of fitness actually improves quite fast. You don't need to wait for 6 months or a year. In a matter of a few weeks, your fitness is starting to show up if you measure the level of fitness. And increasing the level of fitness is very important. You get 2 huge benefits. Number one, your probability of getting disease decrease if you increase fitness. And 2, you decrease the probability of an early death, so potentially increasing your longevity. And this one also a very interesting study, how exercise can improve your ability to decrease suicidal thoughts. Okay, a huge problem. We'll be talking about this on the second hour. You can follow all that research on that page, ResearchGate. My other name is Francisco. You Google Francisco Ramirez ResearchGate and you can have access to those studies. Nothing there is, I'm not selling you absolutely anything. All these things are to help you with motivation and so forth. There's a very active Twitter account, Eddie RD MD, and a YouTube page with multiple videos in different languages. And finally, there is an Instagram page. If you want to come and travel with me around the world, you can go and see the things that I am seeing and experiencing as I am helping people improve their lifestyle. One last clinical case, this one patient of ours that came to our 18-day program. Classic patient that comes to us. Patient has diabetes, patient has high blood pressure. Even though he's taking 2 medications, still his blood pressure is too high, and he is having a hard time with his energy levels and so forth. As he comes to our program, in a matter of 18 days, he's able to lose 7 kilos. His blood pressure comes down to acceptable level, and so does his glucose levels. We had to stop his medication. He no longer needed the medication. Now, he didn't get well and said, "Ooh, I'm going to go back to my old lifestyle." No. He learned his lesson, and he continued to make those changes at home. In a matter of 5 months, he already had lost 37 kilos. He continues doing the changes. In a matter of 12 months, he has lost 50 kilos. And in a matter of a year, we do a complete blood test. And if you can see, everything is completely normal. Blood pressure is normal, even though he doesn't take any medication. His cholesterol, this is the American number, this is the Australian number, completely normal where we want it. Bad cholesterol, also normal. Prostate exam, normal. But the most surprising number that you can see there is this hemoglobin A1C, which means that he is no longer a diabetic. One thing is a diabetic under control of exercise and diet. This one is still a diabetic. This one, his diabetes reversed. And this is the amazing thing about this. This is not something that I have seen, "Oh, I saw this in my 28 years. No, this is something that you commonly see as the persons make the right lifestyle changes. And you can see here in a year and a half, after losing 64 kilos, you can see the before and after. This is the amazing thing about these lifestyle changes that we will be talking about that throughout this week. And what happened to him, it's explained by a concept, by the name, and this is the most complicated word we're going to learn tonight, by the concept of epigenetics. Think of epigenetics as switches that your cells have to turn your genes on and off. The same way as a light. You can have the light, you can have the bulb, you can have the electricity, you can have the right cable, but unless the switch is on, the light is not going to go on. In the same way, you may have some genetic predisposition in your genetics to a certain disease, but unless the switch turns on, you won't experience that problem. So this concept of epigenetics not only has implication for us, but as we can read, this actually has implication with our children. And that's the issue. My choices are having an effect on those switches, and then as I have children, I can pass that predisposition to them. So The first time that the DNA was documented, the person that documented this actually got a Nobel Prize. It was such an important discovery. And in the past, we thought that everything that was written in those genes was going to happen to us. But now we know that because there are those epigenetic switches, certain things can turn on, certain things can turn off. If you're not into genes and these type of things, let me explain to you this in very simple language. You have your cells, and inside your cells, you have the DNA. So the DNA is the instruction manual for your cells. When the cell is injured and it needs some help, there's some computer programs that you can call inside there that run and so forth. Or think about this as a cookbook. What's a cookbook? It's a collection of recipes. So in the same way, inside your cell, there is the DNA, which are a collection of recipes. Now, what's a recipe? A recipe is the step-by-step instructions of how to achieve something. So if you want to make an X recipe, it says there, put 2 of this and 1 of this and mix it for so long and then put it in the oven for this amount of time. And in that way, you are able to achieve something. It's the same thing there. There is step-by-step instructions. Or think about these genes as the apps on your cell phone. Okay? Let me ask you this. Do you run all your apps at the same time? No, you're going to crash your phone if you do that, isn't it? So in the same way, not because the gene is there, that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to run. So the way that it works is the same way that you use your cell phone. Which apps do you run? The apps that you run are the apps that you need. If you're lost, there's a little map there. You click there and they'll show you, where you are, where you're supposed to go. If you want to send a message, well, there's one app there. You can type your message and send the message. If you want to check something on the internet, there's an app for there and so forth. So in the same way, the genes that turn on are the genes that you actually need. So the process of communicating that information is actually quite a complex process. Let me show you this little animation of how this process works. So here we are inside a cell, and that sphere, that's the nucleus. So let us go inside the nucleus. Inside the nucleus is where the famous DNA is located. So anytime that a gene turns on, this is the process that happens inside of you. That, by the way, is happening right now inside of you. So first, we need to make a copy of the recipe that we need. So there's a micro machine that knows how to open that DNA. And then there's another micro machine that assembles and makes the copy of the particular recipe that I need. So very carefully, that copy is made, and then that recipe is not ready. We need to interpret the recipe. So it needs to travel outside. First, it identifies at the door. If it identifies correctly, then the door opens, and then it travels outside of the nucleus. Outside of the nucleus, there is another micro machine that knows how to interpret that. So the recipe sets up in that micro machine, the micro machine assembles, and then we start interpreting this. So the way that we interpret this, there are 3 pairs that are complementary and they need to match exactly. As they match exactly, in the bottom is the end result. This is amino acids that are put together, and this is going to form a protein. Now, this needs to be accurate. If there's a mistake here, I'm going to put the wrong amino acid, and then this is not going to work very well. So here's the recipe, and here's the interpretation of the recipe. Once I interpret that, I'm not done. There's one more step. Now, I need to fold this protein. So there is another micro machine that helps with that folding process. Now, this needs to be done in an accurate way. If the angle is incorrect, the protein is no good. So it needs to be done very, very accurately. So very carefully folding that protein in the right form. There is one last step, and that is that protein is going to be picked up by something like a truck, and then is taken to the body where is needed. Isn't this fantastic? This is happening inside of you right now. The level of complexity, it is really, really high. If you notice, if one step doesn't work, it messes up the whole system. So, let me share with you something very interesting. The DNA also has the instructions of how to make the human body. Okay? So it has all that detail there. What color your skin is going to be, how high you're going to grow up, what's going to be the color of your eyes, what type of personality you're going to have. But also has the instructions of how to make the body itself. So when you were in your mother's womb, this was being read, and that's why you have hands and you have head and legs, and all those things are coded with detail there in that recipe book called the DNA. Now here's the interesting thing. Every cell in your body, that you have more than 1 trillion cells, has the instructions of how to make every organ in your body. In other words, the cells in your toes, they know how to make the brain. How come you don't have the brain there? The cells in your hands, they know how to make the liver. How come you don't have the liver here? What's the answer? Epigenetics. Remember we talked about those switches that turn off and on those genes. So when you were in your mother's womb and it came time to make your hands, we turn off every single gene not related to hand, and we turn on the genes related to the hand. And that's the reason why you have this order inside of you. In fact, have you heard about malformations? See, malformations happen because something was messing around with those switches, medications, chemicals, radiation, and something turned on that shouldn't have been turned on, or turned off that shouldn't be turned off. And that's why mothers need to be so careful during their pregnancy to avoid this type of effects. Now, when I'm talking about that the genes turn off, it means that the body needs to put away those genes somehow. So the genes are not just cut off and sent away. The body still keeps them there, but it packages them very carefully for in a future they are needed, they can actually activate again. Now, the concept of epigenetics also explain the following phenomena. For example, all of us have different cookbooks. My cookbook is different than yours. That's the reason why we are different, okay? But one exception happens to occur with twins, okay? Twins happen to share the same cookbook. That's the reason why they look alike. That's the reason why they even act alike and so forth. But notice the interesting phenomena here. These ladies are twins. No, they didn't paint their hair, but notice how their hair color is different. How come it's different? Epigenetics. By some reason, the gene related to hair color on one was activated correctly, on the other one was not. Epigenetics also explains the following. Look at the eyes on this dog. See, both eyes have the same recipe book, and the recipe book is dictating which color those eyes should be. Now, why are they different? By some reason, the gene of eye color was activated in one and was deactivated in the other one. So you can actually visualize this epigenetics if you see the cell with a microscope. See, you probably have the same problem that I have at home. I have too much stuff in my home. Do you guys have that problem? So what do you do with so much stuff? Well, you put it in some boxes and then in the garage or under the bed or over the dresser. Somehow you find a place. Yes or no? The same thing happens with the genes. See, DNA is very, very, very long. I don't need it all the time. We talked about that, isn't it? The hands need only the genes related to hand, not the other ones. So what the body does when it is deactivated, when the gene is off, the body packages that, and you can actually visualize that. Look at this. When you see this dark area here, that's where the packaged genes are. That's why you can see them. They have more density. But remember the video? How we saw that the DNA opened? Is because it was active DNA. It was stretched out. And that's the reason why that DNA is here in this area, where that's why you cannot visualize it, because it's stretched out. Now, that process of packaging is just amazing how that happens, to be able to package and unpackage depending on the need that you may have. So, our current understanding of disease is that most diseases have their origin at the level of the genes. In other words, there are genes related to disease, there are genes related to health. And this is what they were doing in this particular experiment. They have these special mice in laboratories in which they actually artificially activate the disease genes on these animals. Why are they so mean and doing those things? Well, because they want to study, diseases and these type of things. But what they do, they activate those disease genes, so these mice will develop diabetes, will develop obesity, will develop high cholesterol, and because they're messing around with those genes, they actually mess around with the gene related to skin color. That's why those mice are yellow. Have you seen a yellow mouse? Not unless you go to one of these, labs where they're doing this type of experiments. So look at the fascinating research they did. So they had these mice that genetically was sick because they turned on its disease genes, and when these mice were pregnant, they put them on a healthy lifestyle program. So they gave him, these plant-based foods and exercise and all these good behaviors. But here's the fascinating thing that happened. Those healthy behaviors when the mother was pregnant had an effect on the epigenetic switches to the point that when the mouse was born, it actually became a healthy mice because the health genes were turned on as a result of the healthy behaviors. In fact, when they published this information in the scientific literature, they continue, doing the experiment through many generations. They documented that these changes happen to be inherited to the third and fourth generation. Now, to me, that's very interesting. I happen to have a lot of Jewish blood, and in the Jewish scriptures, it talks about the third and fourth generation. I mean, how Moses wrote this, how come Moses knew this, I don't know where he got his PhD in genetics, but that is something amazing to me. Now, the opposite experiment was run. In this other experiment, they actually did the opposite. They had these rats, but instead of putting them on a healthy lifestyle program, they started feeding these rats all this junk food and high fatty foods and so forth when the rats were pregnant. And what happened to these baby rats when they were born? Something had changed as they started analyzing the brains of these rats. They actually had changed those brains. Those brains were different than the parents' brains. And they started getting pleasure from eating junk food. You think that's good or bad? It started seeking naturally those types of foods. And as they started following up those babies, they found out that those babies had problems with their cholesterol, they had problems controlling themselves, and they were ending up eating too much. They liked to eat all these fat-rich foods. They had their first menstrual period too early. They had problems with their weight and all kinds of problems secondary to the fact that disease genes were turned on by the choices of lifestyle. Now, you may be saying, well, doctor, but we are not rats. Well, that's true. We're not rats, but there are experiments that have been run on humans. For example, this fascinating study, still they're publishing studies on this in the Netherlands. What they did, during the Second World War, the Germans, the Nazis, they really wanted to conquer the Netherlands. Because if you have ever been to the Netherlands, they are the food basket for Western Europe. Lots of agriculture all over the place and husbandry and all kinds of operations of this type. So the Nazis went and conquered the Netherlands and took away the food from the Dutch people to feed the front lines of their armies. And sadly, the Dutch people didn't have much food because the Germans took most of it. And it has been documented that pregnant ladies were surviving with 1/5, 1/6 of the calories a pregnant woman usually needs. Now, these babies, of course, were small for their age and so forth, but they were able to survive those pregnancies. And because that happened, these babies, the genes of these babies learned to survive with very little. In fact, the scientists have even put a name to it. They call them the thrifty genes. So those genes were able to survive with very little food. Even after they were born, there were challenges with food and so forth, but still they were able to survive. And the war was over in a few years, and then again, all the cakes and the dairy and the cookies and all these rich foods came back to the Netherlands. But as they followed those children that were born during that very difficult time of the Netherlands, those children started demonstrating very high rates of very common diseases. Secondary, that their genes used to survive with very little, and now we're putting this overabundance that started turning on their disease genes faster than the general population. Now, you don't need to be from the Netherlands to experience this. If in your ancestors there has been famines, there have been wars, there has been challenges with food, there is a probability you may be carrying some of these genes. And these are the type of populations that you actually don't need to do horribly bad. Just a few bad habits, it's enough to turn on those disease genes in you if you happen to have that type of background. Now, notice this journal, Nutrients. They were analyzing what type of things are having the biggest effect on those epigenetic switches. Notice, citing literally the journal, science has discovered that what we eat exerts the strongest effects on these epigenetic switches. So that means that at home I have something very dangerous. It's called the fork. What you are poking with that fork is either turning on your disease genes or is turning on your health genes. That's why we need to be so careful about our choices. And that's why it has been documented how people that eat enough, not too much, not too little, are able to extend their longevity. You turn on the longevity genes when you are temperate. And also something fascinating. See, if you are a female, when you are pregnant and you happen to carry a female inside of you, when your baby is inside of you, the female, it's actually making the female cells, that little baby inside of you. Which means that your choices are not only affecting that baby, but they're actually affecting the babies of that baby. Fascinating, an interesting thought, isn't it? So that's the way that happened to all of us. What our grandparents were choosing actually had an effect on this. Now, this fascinating study took place not too far from where I am. This happened in San Francisco, California. And in this study, they had 30 males that had low-risk prostate cancer. Sadly, a common cancer here in Australia. Now, prostate cancer happens to be a very special cancer because it behaves differently than many other cancers. And there's even a little bit of controversy how to treat it. There's different schools of thought. One school of thought said, let's go very aggressive and treat it as soon as possible. Another school of thought says, no, let's observe that cancer, see how it develops, and then based on that, we'll choose, what type of treatment and so forth. That's the reason why when the ethics committee looked at this study, they were able to approve this study. And instead of doing the usual treatment, what they did with these 30 males is that they put them on an intensive lifestyle change. And basically, the protocol was the following. They took a biopsy of that prostate, number one, to confirm that it was really prostate cancer, and number two, to try to identify which genes were active. How they did that? Very simply. Remember the video? How a copy of the gene was made and then that traveled outside? Well, if we can count that recipe that is traveling outside, only the genes that are active generate those recipes. So by counting those ones, we knew which genes were active inside. And then they changed the way they live for 3 months, and then they repeated the same thing, took another biopsy of the prostate and compared the results. During those 3 months, what they were doing, they were following what is called a whole foods, plant-based diet, together with stop smoking, stress management, early to bed, exercise, and all these good behaviors. Now, here is the results of the experiment. Let me tell you what you're seeing. Here in the middle, here is the after, here is the before. And here is patient number 1, and this is patient number 1. Do you see these strange letters here? Those are the names of genes. Genes have very strange names. Okay. So just visually speaking, any change there? Yes, isn't it? Lots of changes happening there. Now, when we're talking about cancer and genes, we can talk about 2 big groups of genes related to cancer. We have, number 1, what is called the cancer-promoting genes. Do they sound good or bad? Bad. Those are the ones that stimulate the growth and the metastasis and all these things on cancer. And then we have what is called the cancer inhibitor genes. Good or bad? Good. You want to have those cancer inhibitor genes nice and active as they offer some cancer protection in the body. Notice what happened in this experiment in a matter of 3 months of doing those changes. 400 genes associated with cancer promotion were turned off or down. Good or bad? Good news. And about 50 genes associated with cancer inhibition were turned up or were activated. So you don't need to wait until the day that a doctor gives you a diagnosis of cancer to start making these changes. As you start making these lifestyle changes, you will start creating an impact at the level of your genes. You will start stopping disease genes, and you will start to turn on the health genes. Now, in a separate paper, the same population, they were following up what's happening regarding their size of their prostate cancer. Now, you don't need to have a degree in radiology to understand this. This is before, this is after. What's happening there? The cancer is actually shrinking. Why is that happening? The answer starts with an E. Epigenetics. As the cancer genes are being turned off, then the cancer starts to regress secondary to that. Now, this is not the only study that has been published on the subject. There's multiple studies that have been published on how the choices that we make have an impact on cancer. On this study, the protocol was the following. They had breast cancer cells that they cultivated in a petri dish, And then they had these ladies eat what is called the SAD diet, the standard American diet, okay? Full of all this junk food and fatty foods and excess animal products and so forth. And then they took the blood from those ladies, they put it on the Petri dish. Now, even the standard American diet has some healthy things there. You know, the tomatoes that you're eating and so forth, you know, they still have some antioxidants and there's still some immune system there. And this is what happened. You can see the cancer is here. It was able to kill some of these cells. Still, many of them remain. And then they did the following. They put these ladies on a whole foods, plant-based diet for 2 weeks. And they did the same thing. They cultured the cancer cells, took the blood from these ladies and put it there on the Petri dish. This is what happened. Notice the tremendous cancer-fighting potential that happens when you make this type of changes. So it's not only psychological, oh, I feel so good. There is actually changes at the level of your genes and at the level of your immune system. Here's again, that's the before and that's the after. Powerful the change that can happen. Now, this is not only about food, this is about healthy behaviors. This one about sleep. Basically, 2 groups of young people, volunteers, both of them healthy. One group sleeping 10 hours, too much by the way. Don't say, oh, the doctor said we need to sleep 10 hours. It's too much, but just for the experiment's sake. And the second group was sleeping 6 hours of less. At the end of the week, both groups stayed up for 40 hours. Then they took blood samples from both groups to see what was happening at the level of the genes. Sleeping less than 6 hours a week was turning on 711 genes of disease. So is sleep important? Absolutely. So as you can see, all these behaviors start to work in a synergistic way, so the more of these behaviors that we can apply, the better. Exercise, very important for your health. In this study, people were doing just 20 minutes of exercise. They took a sample from the muscle cells to check the genes. The health genes were being turned on just by 20 minutes of exercise. That, by the way, I would encourage you to do a little bit more than those 20 minutes. And look at this, very interesting study that was done recently, how fathers that exercise their children are smarter. Why is that? And the answer starts with an E. Epigenetics. As the father starts turning on those health genes, you inherit those health genes to your children. So in closing, this is our issue. It's like going to the North Pole and finding some polar bears. Now, while you are freezing there, the polar bears are having a blast. They're like, "Ooh, weather is very nice here," you know. But what if you say, poor bear, you know, it's too cold there. I know of a desert. I'm going to bring that bear to the desert. What do you think that the bear is going to think when he is there? He is not going to be happy at all. He was not designed to live in that environment. And that is exactly what's happening to us. As we have changed our lifestyles, you know, our ancestors used to live very differently from how we're living today. And we are like this bear in the desert. The food sometimes that we're eating, the level of activity that we're doing, the sleep, and all these things are not the way that we were designed to eat. So disease never comes without a cause. The way is prepared, and disease invited by disregards of the laws of health. So I'm so glad that you are here. We're going to be talking about those laws of health. As we identify them, then we'll be able to start applying them in our lives, and then the healing and blessings will come as a result of that. So we're going to be taking a little break, and we'll continue with our second part in a minute.